Thank you, Chris, and thank you for those kind remarks in my introduction.
I'd like to begin with the housing bubble. In your first appearance on the show over 2 years ago, you told listeners that the home mortgage was quite possibly the worst investment an individual could make. This just flew in the face of the general consensus out there. And you also highlighted that the typical borrower would pay for a home 2 to 3 times over on a typical 30-year loan. Now, fast forward to today, and the Case-Shiller Index was off 16, almost 17% from just last year. That's about 20% from the peak for the typical house in this country. Suddenly, the world is facing a serious mortgage-related debt hangover that's threatening the entire system.
Well, sure. That's a topic I think that everybody's very interested in today. I'm not sure that I can contribute that much that hasn't already been said of late, but your point is interesting to me. I don't remember making that statement 2 years ago, but it sounds very much like something I probably would have said 2 years ago. And the reason it was not that I thought mortgages are a bad investment. In a way, you really shouldn't think of them as an investment because people don't. Most people go into mortgages to live in their home, not to use it as an income stream. I think that mortgages for both can be good or bad depending on some other factors. And those factors 2 years ago made them seem to me like they were a bad way to go. The factor I'm talking about, of course, is the price. The price as compared to the earnings ratio, the income stream that could be produced by renting one of those places. The price-earnings ratio, you might say. And it seemed to me that 2 years ago that the housing market was bubbled, that because of the artificial manipulation of interest rates downward, making money so readily available that people could borrow huge amounts of money at relatively low rates. And so therefore they were going deeply into debt, buying homes either to live in or for investments. Either one, they were buying tremendously expensive price tags on these homes without any thought that you'd ever be able to make an income with them if you had to rent them out. Just the assumption was that you'd always be able to sell them to somebody else down the line who'd pay even more for them than you did. So I looked at that and I said, this is not good. It couldn't last. It's just a typical bubble. Economic bubbles have existed for centuries. And this was so obviously just a repeat of one of those bubbles that I told everybody that I thought unless you got a really good value, a very low price on a piece of property, I didn't think then was a good time to go into it. So I don't take any pride in saying that, well, I was right and I told you so, because it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to see what's happened to people's investments in some cases, or the values in their homes, and they got so deeply into debt and way over their heads that now that these prices are, some people say, crashing and falling, I say they're returning to where they should have been all along. Now that the adjustment is being made, a lot of people are hurting badly, and I feel very sorry for them because of that. But maybe this will be a lesson. Maybe next time around, they won't be willing to go into debt so deeply and will be more cautious about the value of those things that they're putting their money into.
Exactly. I mean, the government wants to apparently shield banks from their bad investments, and apparently failure is just not an option anymore. But we all know folks learn the most sometimes from failure, unfortunately.
Failure is very much an option for most of us. If you're not politically connected, failure is very much an option. There's a lot of businesses going out of business. I know if I were to make too many bad decisions in my little business, I would fail. I would go out of business, and I wouldn't expect, Lord forbid, I wouldn't expect the government to come and take money from everybody else and pay me back for my bad decisions. I wouldn't want that, actually. But yet that's what the large corporations do expect.
Just last week, for instance, the billionaire investor Kirk Kerkorian, he didn't come complaining to the government, bail me out. I've just lost almost $1 billion on my investment in Ford. He had invested heavily betting that Ford would rebound, and unfortunately it crashed from about $8 where he made the bulk of his purchases to about $2. Now, I don't use this illustration to throw salt in the wound, but just to point out that we're all in this boat of deflating prices right now, and anyone and everyone seems to be suffering. Summarizing the chain of events that led to this current systemic global crisis. First, Alan Greenspan cut rates 1% in response to the 9/11 disaster, and that's straight out of the playbook, the Federal Reserve playbook. That's what everyone would expect. Next, lender regulations were relaxed by, not just the lenders, but the banks as well, so that homes were sold to anyone that could fog a mirror, whether or not they could put a down payment or not. Combination of these two were, I think, economic napalm, and it fueled a self-perpetuating housing boom. Then risky subprime loans were bundled together into bonds, and simply put, they were sold off by Wall Street using highly leveraged derivatives. Unfortunately, hundreds of top banks and lenders around the globe purchased these ticking time bombs, and now no one is certain who has the unexploded ordnance hidden in their balance sheets.
I think that's an excellent synopsis, Chris. Did you just invent that out of thin air, or had you worked that up? I think it's very, very accurate and very condensed, very accurate.
It was premeditated.
Okay, well, you did an excellent job. Yes, I agree with it totally. That is exactly what's happening.
When we see these dominoes falling now, we have the expectations of several hundred domestic banks to crash. Of course, Europe is struggling with its banking system, and maybe Iceland being the big red flag there for the UK and their European neighbors. Do you suspect that after we have a bounce here in the markets for a while, we will continue with the economic fallout and throughout the whole global system, or will they just fire up the printing presses, send out the fleet of helicopters, and upload trillions of digital dollars?
I believe that your latter scenario is probably what we're facing, I regret to say. Neither scenario is a happy one because both of them are seeking to avoid paying the consequences for past mistakes. And there's no way to do that. In the scenario that you just mentioned, firing up the printing presses and spreading the money around, not exactly by helicopter because they're very selective. Not that everybody gets a crack at it, but those who are politically connected get a very good crack at it. Those in the middle class and the working class, they're getting squeezed because they're the ones who are losing value. But the new money is going into the politically favored class, which is another issue, but it does tend to aggravate the old problem of a widening of the gap between the top and the bottom in the economy. But since the people who are running the show